everybody! Today I'm going to bring you up to speed on transceivers. The short version is that a transceiver is short for transmitter receiver, and generally speaking, it shines light out of it down a fiber to send information and has something to receive, light coming in on fiber to receive information. I think you're going to want to know more than that, so stick around. Hey everybody, I'm Brian, and here's the deal. Sometimes your NIC or switch doesn't have an RJ45 connection on the port you're looking for. Instead, maybe there's one of these squarish holes at the end. My friend, in that case, you need a transceiver of your own. You see, the normal RJ45 plugs on a switch or a NIC, they essentially have one of these transceivers of a sort or PHY built into them, right? Classic gigabit Ethernet is transmitting out on 4 wires and receiving on the other 4 wires. But one of these transceivers, well, for up to 10 or 25 gigabit Ethernet is going to be sending out of one laser or LED, depending on the speed, and receiving on the other at 10 gigabits per second if it's a 10 gig, or 1 gig, or 25 gig, and we'll get into that shortly. But here's the thing, that spot on your switch, or maybe your NIC, is going to need to receive some transceiver that you slide into there. And the different devices can be pretty picky about that. First, speed, and second, brand. So if you've got an Intel NIC or a Broadcom NIC, it's pretty likely you're going to need a matching branded transceiver, though not always. Similar for those switches. Got a Cisco or a Dell or a Brocade, depending on when you bought the thing. Chances are you're looking for a matching brand on those transceivers as well. Now, sometimes there's some semi-hidden command to run to allow third-party transceivers on those switches. Or perhaps even third-party transceivers specifically sold to be compatible with certain brands of switches. Be on the lookout with that. Something to be careful of. But ignoring brand, come back around to that speed thing. Well, that one slot on the switch or on the NIC, depending on what you're doing, might actually support different speed transceivers, but very often you need to get the right transceiver for the speed you're looking for. For instance, this is a 10 gigabit Ethernet transceiver. This is a 25 gigabit Ethernet transceiver, and this is 10 or 25 gigabit. And unless you're staring real close at the labels, there's no real way to tell the difference. So let's go break down the standards and what you might be looking for on that label to figure out who's who. And I think that means time for Tiny Brian. All right, let's do it. So different transceivers, different standards, though all those ones I just held up are physically identically sized. Let's actually start with one I didn't hold up. The SFP transceiver stands for Small Form Factor Pluggable. And SFP transceiver is a 1 gig transceiver, and that's going to be 1 gig transmit and 1 gig receive. Okay, now that might seem a little silly talking about this transmit and receive. It's going to make some more sense pretty soon, though. The next one down would be SFP Plus, and doesn't really stand for much else. It's Small Form Factor Pluggable Plus. But that plus is real valuable because this is where your 10 gig is. And just like before, that's 10 gig transmit, 10 gig receive. So these are those 10 gig transceivers. Next, not the next in order they, got invented and sold, but next in speed would be an SFP 28. And that's just small form factor pluggable 28. Now, the 28 does actually stand for 28 gigabits per second, and so you might be a little confused when I tell you it's a 25 gig transceiver. Yeah, basically it's a little overhead. The extra 3 gigabits per second is sort of lost in overhead, but it's a 25 gig transceiver, and it's 25 gig transmit, 25 gig receive. Okay, receive. And that goes back to, like on those RJ45 connections, like a Cat5e, Cat6 or whatever, there are 8 little wires in there. And 4 of them are going to be used by some computer at this end of the cable to transmit their signal. And the other 4 are going to be used by whatever computers at the other end of the cable to transmit their signal, and so be received back over here, right, for bidirectional communication. On those SFP, SFP+, SFP 28s, you are going to have something like this, an LC connector on a fiber optic cable here. There's plenty of details we could go into there, but we're not focusing on that right now. And one of these fibers, when it's plugged into your transceiver, is going to have a light shining out of this transceiver down there. And not all transceivers do this, but it's pretty common, at least, that actually on the little handle of that transceiver, I don't know if you can make it out. Let me go big. I don't know if you can make it out, but there's a little arrow on the handle pointing outward on one of these, and that's because that's the transmitter side. The LED, or in this case, laser, is behind that, shining down that fiber and would be coming out the other way. Now, don't look in there. You can't see it. It's not visible light spectrum, but it can still hurt you. Don't look down there. And the other side is effectively dark, or certainly would be until I plug this other side into a transmitter, and transceiver, and it's going to be shining down the other fiber back to here. And so that's what I mean by one 10 gig, one transmit, one 10 gig receive. It's 2 fibers, and each one has basically a flashlight shining down it that's blinking real fast in certain frequency, amplitude, and pulses to be able to send essentially the symbols that are that 1 gig, 10 gig, 25 gig connection. Okay, tiny again. And the next one here I want to talk about then is a QSFP. And sometimes you'll see it with a plus, sometimes not. I've generally seen these standard as QSFP plus. They just don't always write it. And I'll go ahead and tack on here as well a QSFP 28. Yeah. And that QSFP for either of these is quad small form factor pluggable. So QSFP plus or QSFP 28. And you might have already jumped to the right conclusion here. Quad means 4. And so yeah, QSFP plus is 4 10 gigs bound together to make a 40 gig link. QSFP 28 is 4 25 gigs bound together to make 100 gig. Yeah. Now when I say bound together, I don't mean that you can take 4 ports on the front of some switch and say, hey, you 4, be 1 port. I've never seen that to be the case. No, if these are 4 10 gig ports over here, I cannot turn them into a 40 gig port. If it's 4 25 gig ports over here, I cannot turn them into 25 gig. But turning. If you've got a bigger hole like this, it's not for a 10 or 25 gig transceiver. It's instead a 40 or 100 gig transceiver. And those 40 or 100 gig transceivers are the same size as each other. Don't worry about this big plastic thing hanging off the end. Different transceiver models from different manufacturers or whatever may or may not have this on there. It's like a little extra handle and release, and also helps to support the fiber coming out of it. But, maybe they got it, maybe they don't. It's fine. But these are the exact same size as each other, the same way 10 and 25 gig SFP plus and SFP 28, even down to 1 gig, they're all the same size as each other. The 40 and 100 gig standards here of QSFP plus and 28, the transceivers are physically the same size, and so could slide into either slot, at least on a switch. I still got to be careful for that branding, for the speed. Does the NIC support it? That's the same size. Okay, and these connectors are different. You're not going to be putting one of these LC connectors with just 2 fibers into there. Dink, dink, not going to do you any good. No, no, no. Instead, a very different connector. Something like this MPO connector. And this doesn't look like it because there's just one cylinder, one plastic tube on the outside here, but this is not one fiber. Inside of here are several fibers, and you actually got to totally look on the label to see what you've bought, because this same connector and the same looking thing could have many different options for how many fibers are in there, and you got to make sure you got the right one. For 40 gig or this 100 gig, QSFP plus QSFP 28, you would be looking for 8 fibers in there. Yeah, 8 fibers. But there are options for 12 or 16 fibers as well for different standards or for different things. And I don't know if it's going to work. In fact, let me go big. Just pointing the other end of this at my light. So if y'all can see, it looks like there's a bar of light coming in now, right? Why? It's because there's a whole bunch of fibers all lined up on there. Half of them would be expecting to line up with 4 different lasers in here shooting down the line to the transceiver at the other end of the cable. Half of them are going to be a receiver on this side, and there's lasers on the other side shining down the way back to here. Why half and half? Well, because like we said, quad SFP plus means 4 10 gig links. Ha! Hey, y'all, I just noticed earlier I typed 10 times 1 gig on this 10 gig. Yeah, man, I've just typed the wrong thing. SFP plus is 1 times 10 gig in each direction. Anyway, 40 gig is going to be 4 times 10 gig, and that QSFP 28 is 4 times 25 gig. Awesome. And very generally speaking, if you already had fiber laid out in the walls, buried under the parking lot, whatever. If you already had fiber that was good for 40 gig, well, heck, let me back up even more. You already had fiber that was good for 10 gig over a given run, it is very likely that you could have used those same fibers for 40 gig. It's just you'd need to potentially have adapt those fibers down through something to give you the correct connector to plug into them. And very likely, if you had fibers for that 10 gig and 40 gig, it is pretty likely that you could use the same thing for your 25 gig that you did for your 10, and so for your 100 gig that you did for your 40 gig. Now, not necessarily. It is possible that you have a little bit of slightly out of spec fiber, something that was barely great enough for 40 gig, and is not going to work when you try and get it over to 100 gig. But pretty often, a given run of 10 gig fiber or 40 gig, probably good for 25 or 100 gig. Okay, so action items. What do you do with this information? First, if you've bought that NIC, some 10 gig NIC, or maybe you're going real fancy, 25 or 100 gig NIC, be on the lookout for one that's got transceivers in it already, because it is very, very likely that they're giving you the right transceiver for that NIC. And if you bought one without transceivers, sometimes it can be a pain to get a working transceiver for it. On the switch side, it is very unlikely if you're buying a secondhand switch that it's going to come with transceivers. And if you're buying a new switch, I guarantee you it is not going to come with transceivers if it needs it. That is an extra cost. Absolutely. So be on the lookout there for making sure that you are getting the transceivers you need when you buy those switches. You might not need them at all, right? Maybe it's just a few ports that are on the back or the end that you don't want to use anyway. But if those are ports you're expecting to use, make sure that you got a plan for it. Get a quote from whomever you're buying the switch from. Keep an open mind to maybe look out for other vendors as well. fs.com is a well-known, reasonably trusted source of transceivers who basically make their own copies of transceivers designed to work with third party, right? To work with Cisco or HP or whomever. So that's a pretty good choice. Also, be on the lookout for, go in that user manual, hit up on Google for whatever vendor switch you're looking for. Check for some command to allow third-party transceivers as well. But do not assume that just because you got a drawer of transceivers, even if they match the brand, do not assume that they are going to work in your new switch. Talk with your salesperson ahead of time to make sure. Have a plan, because, man, I've seen many an install that everything was going to just be taken care of in an afternoon, and it turns out that the transceivers that were already sitting in the drawer didn't work, or the wrong ones got purchased, and then suddenly you're on like a 2-week wait for the new stuff to come in. So look out for that. Last action items, look at those transceivers themselves. Very often, they're going to have the words that we're talking about here. Okay, let's take a look at these. I'm going to try and hold still here. The bottom one doesn't say anything about SFP Plus at all. You'd end up having to Google that part number to find out. The middle one says SFP 28 on it, so you know it is a 25 gig transceiver. And the top one says 10G or 25G, and so you know those speeds are supported. So there's a lot of inconsistency across different makers. Over here on these other transceivers. Here we go. This is one of my 100 gig transceivers. It does not say QSFP28 on there. It just says 100 gig. There's then a little handle thing too in the cutout. Here's my Dell 40 gig transceiver. It doesn't say that early on there, but looking up the part number online, you can figure it out. So it is a little bit of a mess. Be careful to get the right one. Be a little more careful than me, by the way, as well. Really should have plugs in all of these to keep the lasers and the receivers in good shape. Same with my fibers here. Should really have caps on these as well. This is all eBay and show and tell more than anything else, so I'm not having to be too careful, but take care of yourself. All right, so there's always more to talk about, right? Short range versus long range. Didn't even talk about direct attach cables or DACs. So I think we're going to save those for another video because the longer ones don't do as good. So do me a favor, drop me in the chat if there's some particular thing you're looking for. Maybe you want a little more info on DACs or on cable links or single mode versus multi-mode. Let me know what you're looking for, and if I hear from you, I'll go ahead and make one of them as well. Meantime, everybody, thanks for coming back. Hope you're having an awesome day, and we'll see you in the next one. Transceivers, more than meets the eye. You're telling me. Don't look down those things. That's how I lost mine.